Shocking. The Empire burned worlds without resistance, believing nothing could stop them. But when their fleets reached Earth, one human warship stood in their path. What followed was not survival, it was vengeance. Watch till the end. Like, comment, and subscribe for more legendary tales. The galaxy trembled beneath the march of the conquerors. Their fleets were endless. Black clouds that drifted from system to system, blotting out the stars with their size and firepower. Entire civilizations that had stood for millennia were reduced to ash in days, their monuments ground into dust, their peoples scattered or enslaved. Where their banners flew, silence followed, and worlds once rich with life became cold reminders of inevitability. They were the Empire, a species so ancient and vast that their enemies no longer resisted. Resistance had become myth, hope a relic of the past. World after world fell without a fight. The sheer inevitability of conquest breaking spirits before a single shot was fired. From the dark corners of the galaxy came whispers of the next target. Earth, humanity's homeworld. The invaders had studied the human race from afar and dismissed them as nothing more than a curiosity. Clever enough to build starships, stubborn enough to colonize harsh worlds, but ultimately unworthy of serious consideration. Humanity had no great empire, no vast fleets to challenge galactic powers, no technology that could rival the advanced civilizations already crushed beneath the conqueror's heel. To the Empire, humans were insects crawling in the dust, a brief distraction before the path of conquest continued further into the stars. But the galaxy did not understand Earth. They did not understand the story of a species that had risen from a hostile planet where storms raged, volcanoes burned, and predators stalked in the dark. They did not understand the wars that had scarred humanity's history, the resilience etched into their bones, the will that had carried them from caves to cities, from oceans to orbit, and from orbit into the deep abyss of space. They did not understand that humanity had learned long ago that survival was not gifted. It was earned, clawed from the jaws of extinction with grit and fury. And when such a species was cornered, it did not bow, it bared its teeth. Still the Empire advanced, their admirals laughing as they plotted the route into human space. One more cluster of stars, one more fragile species to bend or burn. They counted the worlds that would fall. They mocked the small fleets that stood in their way, and they spoke as if the campaign would be nothing more than a footnote in their endless chronicles of domination. Yet even as they prepared their assault, their scouts brought back strange reports. A signal detected on the edges of Terran territory, too structured to be random static, too powerful to be dismissed as background noise. It repeated endlessly in every galactic tongue, "You will advance no further." The commanders of the Empire mocked the warning, calling it desperate bravado from a species too weak to understand its place. They broadcast laughter across their own channels, declaring that humans would be swept aside like dust in the void. But their soldiers, hardened though they were, felt unease. The message carried no fear, no plea for mercy. It was cold, absolute, and calm. It was not the voice of prey, but the voice of something waiting in silence, something that had endured storms before and learned to strike back harder. As the alien fleets crossed into human space, they expected the usual signs of panic, evacuation, surrender, chaos. What they found instead was stillness. Human colonies did not scatter, human ships did not flee. On their sensors, a single massive signature appeared, holding its position between the invading armada and the path to Earth. The alien commanders leaned forward in disbelief as the shape resolved on their screens. A warship, larger than anything humanity was supposed to possess, its hull scarred but unbroken, its silhouette grim and defiant. It did not retreat, it did not broadcast surrender. It simply waited, daring the invaders to test its strength. The Empire had crushed countless fleets. They had shattered worlds. They believed no force in the galaxy could stand before them. But as their dreadnoughts aligned and their weapons charged, a quiet realization began to spread through their ranks. They had faced armies, empires, and civilizations before. They had never faced humanity, and though they did not yet understand it, their path of conquest had just reached its end. The Empire advanced with arrogance still burning in their hearts. their fleet spanning the void like endless waves of steel and fire. System after system along the edge of human space was probed, charted, and marked for destruction. Yet the deeper they pressed, the stranger things became. Patrols sent ahead failed to return, vanishing into the black with no trace. Scouts sent to map asteroid belts found their own data corrupted, as if some unseen hand had reached into their systems and twisted every reading into nonsense. Entire convoys reported phantom echoes on their sensors, shapes too vast to be debris, too precise to be natural. When fleets turned to investigate, they found nothing but empty stars, as if whatever had been there was watching and waiting just beyond their perception. At first, the commanders dismissed these anomalies as the expected desperation of a dying species. Sabotage born from desperation, but the patterns grew harder to explain. In one sector, fuel depots mysteriously detonated, destroying half a supply fleet before the battle had even begun. In another, encrypted orders were intercepted and rerouted, leading ships into ambushes they had no hope of surviving. The Empire had faced rebellion before, but never with such precision. It was as though the humans were not merely resisting. They were playing a game only they understood. A game in which the Empire's strength became its weakness. On occupied colonies, alien troops began reporting an unnerving pattern. Human civilians did not beg for mercy. They did not scatter like frightened prey. Instead, they stared with cold eyes, silent and unbroken, as if they carried knowledge the Empire could not touch. Garrisons stationed in these places described a sense of being watched, as though every shadow held a hidden enemy, every quiet moment hid a trap waiting to be sprung. Soldiers spoke of finding messages scrawled across abandoned walls. "We are waiting." These words spread through the ranks like a contagion, unsettling even the most hardened warriors. Still, the admirals pressed forward, their faith in overwhelming firepower drowning their unease. They told their soldiers that fear was weakness, that no primitive species could threaten the Empire's reign. But even they could not ignore what came next. As their fleets massed on the border of Earth's protectorate, they detected fragments of transmissions, human voices, distorted but clear enough to strike with precision. They were not calls for peace nor pleas for negotiation. They were warnings, spoken in tones stripped of desperation, spoken with certainty. Every world you burn carries a price. Every step you take brings you closer to the one enemy you cannot conquer. The alien high command laughed at the words, but their laughter was strained. They had heard rumors from other sectors of the galaxy, whispers of human resilience that bordered on the unnatural, but they had never seen it for themselves. Now, as they drew closer to Earth, their own soldiers were whispering those same rumors, repeating stories of human troops that fought without surrender, of ships that did not retreat, of a species that endured suffering beyond reason and returned stronger for it. The fleet gathered in its greatest strength yet, stretching across the void like a wall of iron and flame. Their weapons glowed, their engines burned, their confidence still held. But in the silence before the attack, every sensor lit with the same impossible reading. A massive energy signature pulsed in the dark ahead of them, steady and immovable, as though a star had awoken in defiance. The shape resolved slowly on their screens. A single human warship, still waiting, still silent, positioned directly between them and the heart of Earth. The admirals snarled. One ship could not halt the advance of an empire, but as they stared at the silhouette, their unease grew sharper, heavier, undeniable. This was no desperate act of defiance. This was a message carved into steel. For the first time, the Empire wondered if they were walking into something far worse than a war. The admirals of the Empire gave the order to fire with the same arrogance they had carried through countless campaigns. Thousands of weapons lit the void in unison, a symphony of destruction designed to erase whatever dared oppose them. The sky burned as beams of plasma, torrents of missiles, and cannons that had shattered fortress worlds converged on the lone Terran warship. For long moments, the brilliance of their assault outshone the stars themselves, until the void resembled a newborn sun. Then, as the light faded and the echoes of impact died away, the shape still stood, unmoved, untouched. Confusion rippled through the alien fleet. Their weapons had cracked continents, yet this vessel had endured as though the storm had been no more than rain. Scanners scrambled to make sense of what they had just seen, but every system returned only contradictions. The human hull did not register as metal, nor energy, nor any material known in the vast catalogues of the Empire. It absorbed their readings and returned only silence. Their most advanced technology, the pride of an empire built on conquest, could not even explain what their enemy was made of. Then, the warship answered. It did not fire a volley. It did not unleash chaos. It chose a single target, one of the Empire's command dreadnoughts, a vessel large enough to house a city within its armored hull. The Terran railgun fired once. The soundless flash tore across the void faster than alien sensors could track, and the dreadnought split apart in silence, its armored spine shattering as though it had been glass struck by a hammer. Shock cascaded through the alien fleet, their formations faltering as reality caught up to arrogance. Before they could regroup, the warship moved. It did not glide like their vessels, elegant and deliberate. It lunged, cutting through their formations with the precision of a predator. From its flanks poured drones unlike any machine the Empire had faced. Swarms of black, angular constructs that latched onto alien hulls and tore through them with savage precision. Entire squadrons vanished in the blink of an eye, their screams cut short as their ships broke apart under the relentless assault. Worse still, the warship seemed to anticipate their every move. When the Empire tried to retreat and regroup, their communications dissolved into static, jammed by signals too complex to decode. When they attempted to overwhelm the Terran vessel with sheer numbers, it shifted its position with uncanny foresight, always where it needed to be, always one step ahead. It was as though it had studied them for centuries, as though it knew their weaknesses better than they knew their strengths. Then came the broadcast. Every screen, every comms channel, every frequency rang with a human voice, steady and cold. You should have listened when we told you to stop. Every world you took, every life you ended brought you here. You thought us fragile. You thought us prey. You were wrong. The words echoed across the Empire's vast networks, reaching not only the soldiers who fought, but the civilians who watched from afar. For the first time, the conquerors tasted fear. Panic spread among the ranks. Some ships broke formation and attempted to flee, only to vanish into clouds of debris as the Terran warship cut them down. Others pressed the attack in desperation, hurling themselves forward as if sheer courage could pierce the wall of inevitability standing before them. But every shot they fired was wasted, every strike met with silence, every sacrifice swallowed whole by the monstrous ship that refused to die. In the command chambers of the Empire, silence reigned. Their advisors stared in disbelief, their calculations unraveling. For centuries they had dismissed humanity as irrelevant, a minor species barely worth acknowledgement. Now, in a single battle, they realized the truth. They had not uncovered humanity's weakness. They had provoked humanity's wrath. And the worst part was not the power of the warship, nor the drones that shredded fleets, nor the weapons that shattered dreadnoughts with a single shot. The worst part was the way the humans fought, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with a patience and certainty that belonged to those who had endured hell before and learned to make war into an art. The Empire had laughed at the idea of human defiance. Now they knew that laughter had been their first mistake. The galaxy had witnessed the fall of countless civilizations before, but this was different. This was not another empire rising to challenge the old. This was something older, deeper, and more dangerous, a species that had built itself on surviving the impossible, now showing the universe what survival truly meant. The Empire had believed no one could block their path. They had been wrong. The path ended here, before a single Terran warship that would not yield. And as the wreckage of their fleet drifted silently through the void, the admirals whispered the words none had dared to speak aloud. What if this is only the beginning? The Empire was not a creature to collapse with one blow. For all their arrogance, they had endured for millennia by responding to threats with overwhelming force. When word spread of the single Terran warship blocking their path, of dreadnoughts shattered and fleets routed, the High Council reacted with fury. Orders were dispatched to every armada within range. Reinforcements surged across slipstreams, battle groups abandoned ongoing conquests, and the skies of human space darkened as more and more ships poured in. It was not strategy that drove them now, but pride. The thought that a single vessel could hold back their advance was intolerable, a humiliation that demanded erasure. And so they gathered a fleet unlike any the galaxy had seen in centuries. Thousands of ships aligned in formation so vast they blotted out stars, determined to drown humanity in fire. The admirals reassured themselves that numbers would break any defense. They had crushed civilizations with less, yet deep inside unease lingered. The data from the first encounter still haunted them. The way the Terran warship endured their fire without flinching, the way it moved as if it had already predicted their tactics, the way a single voice had turned their triumph into doubt. But arrogance was the marrow of the Empire, and arrogance would not allow retreat. They would prove with sheer force that humanity's defiance was nothing more than a delay in the inevitable. The battle began with calculated brutality. Entire wings of bombers surged ahead, their payloads designed to tear apart capital ships. Behind them came cruisers bristling with plasma cannons, followed by dreadnoughts that could flatten continents. The void erupted with light, an artificial dawn spreading across human space as 1,000 suns ignited at once. The Terran warship stood at the center of it all, alone, silent, waiting. For a moment, the Empire believed they would finally crush it. But then, the trap closed. Asteroids in nearby belts shifted, revealing themselves as hidden weapons platforms. Fields of debris that had seemed natural sprang to life. Cloaked drones rising from their concealment to carve through advancing wings. Entire flotillas stumbled into kill zones as the warship guided its fire with terrifying precision, striking command ships and severing formations. The void became a labyrinth, every path shaped by human design. The Empire had thought they were the hunters. In truth, they had been led into a cage. Worse still, their attempts to adapt only deepened their losses. When they tried to scatter, the warship divided them with pinpoint strikes, isolating fragments of the fleet and annihilating them one by one. When they tried to concentrate their forces, drones swarmed their flanks, cutting supply ships and crippling engines until their mass became immobile targets. Their own numbers betrayed them, turning into chaos under the weight of human interference. It was as though the Terrans had anticipated not just their strategies, but their psychology, their very instincts. Alien commanders raged as they watched centuries of doctrine fail before their eyes. Their weapons struck again and again, yet the Terran ship refused to yield. Every scar it bore was a reminder of its endurance, every counterstrike a testament to its patience. It was not a desperate stand. It was a predator choosing when to strike, bleeding the Empire slowly, deliberately, with a cruelty born of experience. For humanity had learned across its long, violent history that wars were not won by strength alone. They were won by breaking the enemy's will piece by piece until their power became meaningless. As the battle dragged on, a grim realization spread through the alien ranks. The Terran ship was not simply fighting to survive. It was teaching them a lesson. Every ambush, every precision strike, every dismantled fleet screamed the same truth. Humanity was not improvising. Humanity had prepared for this. The Empire had thought they were erasing an upstart species, but in reality, they had walked into a war humanity had been building toward all along. In the aftermath of the slaughter, as debris fields stretched across sectors and surviving fleets scrambled to regroup, the Empire's pride turned to desperation. They still told themselves they could win. They still whispered that overwhelming force would prevail if only they committed more ships, more weapons, more fury. But beneath the bravado, fear had taken root. For the first time in their long history, the Empire faced an enemy that not only endured their onslaught, but turned their strength against them. And though they clung to the belief that victory was still possible, a shadow lingered in every admiral's mind. If this was only one warship, what else had humanity hidden in the dark? The Empire reeled from the slaughter, yet its leaders refused to accept defeat. They summoned more fleets, drawing ships from distant sectors, stripping their borders bare to crush humanity once and for all. The message spread across their dominion. One human warship had humiliated the Empire, and such an insult could not stand. Armadas converged, their numbers swelling until the void itself seemed filled with steel and fire. Billions of lives and centuries of resources were poured into this offensive. The Empire would not be denied. They would tear humanity apart, no matter the cost. But the humans had been waiting for this moment. The Terran warship, still scarred from endless battles, drifted at the center of the Empire's fury, seemingly alone, its lights dim, its hull motionless. Alien admirals sneered, believing they had finally cornered their prey. Yet even as their weapons aligned, something changed. Space itself seemed to shiver, as though reality were bending under a weight unseen. And then, from the abyss, humanity's true hand was revealed. Hidden in the black for years, dormant in silence, more ships emerged. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. Entire fleets slipped from concealment. Carriers and dreadnoughts bristling with weapons the Empire had never recorded, their silhouettes etched with scars that spoke of endless preparation. These were not the fragile vessels the Empire had dismissed in their surveys. These were leviathans, forged in secret shipyards, born not for exploration or defense but for vengeance. Humanity had never intended to meet the Empire with diplomacy. They had been building toward this war in silence, waiting until the arrogance of the conquerors pushed them into overreach. And humanity was not alone. Alongside the Terran fleets came allies once thought lost to fear. Species enslaved by the Empire rose now in rebellion, their ships crude but burning with vengeance, their banners unfurled for the first time in centuries. For every ally who joined, there were others who supplied intelligence, sabotage, and hidden caches of weapons. The galaxy itself had been waiting for a spark, and humanity had lit the fire. The Empire had not merely attacked Earth. They had unified every enemy they had ever made, and now they faced a coalition bound together by humanity's defiance. The Empire's admirals felt the first crack of despair. They had committed their strength here in one decisive strike, but instead of overwhelming humanity, they had been lured into a trap so vast, so patient, it defied imagination. Their fleets, spread across sectors, were now surrounded on all sides by forces they had once ruled with iron. They had underestimated humanity's willpower, and worse, they had underestimated humanity's ability to inspire others. Then came the weapon. The Terran warship's core flared, a pulse of energy rippling outward. It was not a blast of destruction, but a display of power, warping gravity itself, bending the paths of enemy vessels, dragging entire formations into firing arcs from which they could not escape. It was as though the humans had tamed the very laws of the cosmos, twisting them into weapons. The Empire's strongest shields failed, their armor peeled away, their mighty dreadnoughts crumpled like paper. It was not just overwhelming firepower, it was inevitability made manifest. Humanity had rewritten the rules of war, and the Empire had no defense against it. The alien soldiers fought with desperation, but their hearts were broken. For centuries they had believed themselves invincible, the apex of galactic power. Now in the shadow of humanity's vengeance they saw the truth. They had built their empire on fear, and fear had finally come for them. Their commanders screamed orders, their admirals rallied their fleets, but no tactic held, no maneuver saved them. For every ship that fell from the Terran line, 10 more of theirs were reduced to ash. Across the galaxy, observers watched in silence. Neutral powers, hidden councils, distant colonies, all saw the Empire falter, all saw humanity rise. And in every corner of the stars, whispers began to spread. The humans had been underestimated. They had been dismissed as weak, fragile, unworthy. But now they had done what no species had ever done. They had brought the Empire to its knees. In the Empire's command halls, despair turned into a single, unspoken truth. This war could not be won. Not against a species that bled and rose stronger. Not against a fleet that had been forged in shadows. Not against a people who carried vengeance like a weapon. They had not just provoked humanity. They had awoken it. And as the wreckage of their fleets drifted silently into the void, the admirals whispered what they had sworn never to admit. They had triggered a war they could never survive. The void burned brighter than 1,000 suns. The Empire had thrown the greatest concentration of firepower in its history into the battle, an armada stretching across the sector like a wall of iron and flame. Dreadnoughts unleashed storms of plasma. Carriers vomited endless wings of interceptors. Siege engines hurled weapons capable of cracking planets. The sky itself seemed to collapse under the sheer violence of their fury. Yet at the heart of it all, humanity held the line. The Terran warship led the charge, its hull wreathed in fire and shadow, tearing through enemy formations as though destiny itself guided its guns. Every strike was precise, every maneuver flawless, as though the ship's crew saw not the present battle but the future outcome of every exchange. Human fleets surged beside it, a tide of steel that answered every Imperial assault with ruthless efficiency. Swarms of drones blackened the void, slipping through gaps in enemy shields and detonating in coordinated storms. Carriers launched waves of fighters armed with weapons designed to bypass alien defenses, slicing apart cruisers in moments. Allied species joined the fray, their ships battered but unyielding, fighting with a fury born from centuries of slavery. They struck not only with weapons, but with vengeance. Each kill a liberation, each enemy vessel reduced to ash, a reclamation of stolen pride. The galaxy, long subdued under the Empire's shadow, roared to life in open defiance. The Empire's formations crumbled. What had once been a wall of unity became fragments of chaos. Admirals shouted orders drowned by static as Terran interference blanketed their comms. Ships, blind and confused, crashed into one another or drifted helplessly as gravity warps from human weapons bent their courses. Their mighty dreadnoughts, symbols of invincibility, were torn open by railgun slugs that moved too fast to intercept. Beams of energy split carriers in half, scattering their burning wreckage into the abyss. The Terran warship's reactor flared again, unleashing a surge that swallowed entire squadrons in a single flash, leaving only drifting husks and silence. Still, the Empire fought. Pride demanded they resist, demanded they prove their supremacy, even as fear hollowed their resolve. Their soldiers hurled themselves forward with desperation, knowing retreat meant disgrace, knowing survival was no longer certain. But every effort faltered against the tide of inevitability. Humanity was not fighting for conquest or for glory. They were fighting with the patience of a predator, the certainty of a people who had endured every trial and refused to kneel. The more the Empire resisted, the more humanity revealed of its strength, layer upon layer of terrifying capability that shredded every hope of recovery. As the battle reached its peak, the Terran warship pierced the heart of the Empire's formation. Its silhouette, black against the fire of dying ships, became a symbol of doom to every alien eye that saw it. Its weapons struck the Empire's flagship, a vessel so vast that it had ruled as a moving throne of power, a ship said to embody the Empire itself. For centuries it had represented dominance. In minutes it became wreckage. The Terran railgun fired once, and the flagship split apart in silence, its core detonating in a storm that consumed everything around it. Admirals, commanders, and heirs to the Empire vanished in that fire, leaving only chaos in their wake. The Empire's fleets broke. Those that could fled, their formations disintegrating into desperate jumps across the stars. Those that remained were cut down, their crews surrendering or annihilated. What had begun as a demonstration of Imperial supremacy ended as an absolute rout. The might of millennia shattered in the span of hours. Across the galaxy, the images spread of burning dreadnoughts, of shattered fleets, of the Terran warship standing alone in the void, scarred but unbroken. Every world enslaved, every species silenced by the Empire's rule, saw the same truth. The conquerors had been broken by humanity. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy witnessed not the fall of another victim, but the fall of an empire. And it was not brought down by a rival dynasty or by an ancient power. It was brought down by humans, a species dismissed as insignificant, a species that had bled, endured, and risen to meet the storm. The Empire had believed humanity would be another stepping stone in their endless march. Instead, they had become the wall that ended it. And in the smoking ruins of that battlefield, a single reality settled across every surviving commander, soldier, and citizen of the Empire. They had awakened something they could never control, something they could never erase. Humanity had stepped into the light of history, not as prey, not as rebels, but as the storm that no empire could withstand. The battlefield fell into silence, the kind of silence that carried more weight than the thunder of war. Where once an armada had stretched across the void, now only wreckage drifted, the shattered bones of an empire scattered among the stars. Fire burned dimly in the husks of dreadnoughts, the twisted remains of cruisers spun aimlessly, and frozen bodies of warriors who had once believed themselves invincible drifted among the debris. Humanity's warship, blackened and scarred but unbroken, hung at the center of it all, its hull gleaming faintly as though mocking the ruin that surrounded it. The battle had not only been a victory, it had been a rewriting of the galaxy's order. News spread faster than light. Systems that had lived in chains for centuries received transmissions of the Empire's defeat, and in every colony, every slave world, every subjugated race, the reaction was the same. First came disbelief, then awe, and finally something that had not been spoken aloud in generations: hope. They whispered the word humans as though it were both a prayer and a warning. Children in hidden caves, freedom fighters on occupied worlds, and rulers of neutral states all spoke the name with reverence. Where the Empire had ruled with fear, humanity now stood as the embodiment of defiance. Within the Empire's fractured remnants, despair took root. Admirals who survived the slaughter argued among themselves, but their soldiers no longer listened. Garrisons mutinied, colonies declared independence. Entire fleets surrendered rather than face the possibility of the Terran warship appearing before them. The very foundation of their authority, built on the illusion of invincibility, had crumbled in a single day. Their citizens asked questions their rulers had no answers for. How could a single human warship defy the full might of the Empire? And what would come next? In the halls of the Galactic Council, silence reigned. For centuries, those who had survived by appeasing or avoiding the Empire had believed themselves clever, safe, beyond the reach of war. Now they sat in shock, staring at the feeds of the battle's aftermath. Humanity had not simply defended its home, it had shattered the myth of inevitability. And more than that, it had revealed something the Council feared more than the fall of the Empire itself. The humans were not done. Their warship stood in the void as a promise and a warning, scarred but alive, daring anyone to test them again. On Earth, the victory was not celebrated with drunken revelry or careless triumph. The people gathered in solemn silence, names of the fallen echoing across every screen, every colony honoring those who had bled for this moment. Humanity understood the cost of war too well to revel in it, but they also understood what had been achieved. No longer would they be dismissed as fragile. No longer would they be ignored as irrelevant. The galaxy had seen their strength, their patience, their fury. They had shown that when cornered, humanity would rise with fire that could consume empires. The final broadcast came from the warship itself, its signal reaching every corner of the stars. The Admiral's voice was calm, resolute, and unforgettable. "We did not seek this war, but you brought it to our home. Know this. If you raise your hand against humanity, you will pay. We will bleed, but we will never surrender. We will endure, and we will return, and when we do, your worlds will fall as your empire has fallen. Remember this day. Remember who stopped you." Those words became scripture. Across liberated worlds, rebels etched them into stone. Across neutral territories, rulers whispered them in fear. Across the broken empire, survivors repeated them as nightmares. Humanity had not claimed the galaxy, but they had claimed its memory. No fleet, no empire, no council could erase what had been done. From that day onward, the galaxy would measure itself against the humans, not as rivals, but as the standard of survival. And so the story ended with a truth too heavy for any conqueror to bear. Worlds had fallen before the Empire's march. Countless civilizations erased in silence. But when they reached humanity, their path ended. For one Terran warship stood against them, and in that stand, the universe learned a lesson it would never forget. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was the storm. If this story of humanity's defiance and vengeance gave you chills, make sure to like this video. Leave a powerful comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next legendary tale. The legends of humanity are only beginning, and the next story will leave you breathless.